Hello, my name is Jamie Colston. I am a facilitator of systemic constellations work, participatory processes. This morning I have been designing grief rituals. I'm a community organizer, poet and a parent. And the work I do is local, it's international, it's in person, online and hybrid. And today I'm going to be talking to Aleksandra Shymina, a systemic constellations and systemic ritual practitioner, creator of Becoming a Good Ancestor program, writer and ritual maker. We met for the first time in London recently and had a really lovely walk along the canal from King's Cross to Camden, sharing stories and memories. Welcome. Thanks so much for coming today.
Thank you, Jamie. That's a lovely introduction. Very nice to be here and to do this conversation.
Maybe we can start with a breath. I need that. So today we're going to talk a bit about constellations work and probably ritual work as well, and then see where we go. The first question we'll start off with is, what is systemic constellations to you? And how do you apply this way of seeing the world to who you are and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, that was a big question for me to think about. Systemic constellations, the way I see it, is a framework for healing. First of all, this is how I met it. For personal transformation, for collective transformation. It's also part of a bigger picture. So it's because of its roots and how it came about. It's a framework that fits in a wider picture of different traditions from around the world. So that's why it works so well with ritual, with shamanic practices, with other energy work, with body work. It brings together various elements that are so true that they work in a variety of ways. Also, I was thinking that systemic constellations is a technique, because you can, even if you don't work with systemic family systems, you can still apply the technique of this framework. Specifically, representing, for example, is very useful. You can introduce it to any type of work as an additional tool for discerning and receiving information with your body wisdom. That's what it is for me. For me personally, what it does and how I use it and how I apply it in my personal life is very much through following the philosophy and keeping an eye on what they call the orders of love. So with the orders, they're talking about particular principles that when they are in balance, the whole system is in balance. So often I will be looking at, for example, who am I excluding or who am I including? Because one of the principles is inclusion and exclusion. Or I would consider, is this my place? Am I being bigger than I'm expected to be? Am I stepping from a role of a child in the lineage to the role of a grandparent, for example, which is not my place? I would also use it in terms of body wisdom and checking a variety of questions just that come up every day for myself from the point of working in the field. That's another concept we work with in systemic constellations, what shows up in the field. So I will do it for myself, for my personal questions. Yeah, a variety of ways for personal, also sort of looking at my family system over the years and working through the different entanglements. So systemic constellations, family constellations, is also a lens of perception. When you look at your family in a particular way, understanding particular dynamics, particular patterns, and looking for what is needed to resolve something. And a lot of the time, what is needed is to give it back to where it belongs. So often we carry feelings and behaviors and reactions that are not necessarily ours. You know, we know it from the epigenetics and generational trauma transference, but also in smaller things, in not necessarily in trauma things, but just in terms of everyday reactions and behaviors. Sometimes we don't know why am I doing this? Why am I so upset because of this? Because it's seemingly a very small trigger. So sometimes it's not ours. So for me personally, that's what I would do as well. I would, if something comes up, I will look into where does it actually belong, and work with it so that I can release it to where it belongs and not carry what is not mine.
Thanks. So many
And
different
that's
bits.
sort of like personal. There was
No, carry on. Carry on.
no, I was just thinking that I missed the last bit of the question, which was personal and work. Sort of how do I work with it? And I work with it. This is what I do as my work. I do systemic family constellations as a one-to-one and as group, and as you said, with the Becoming a Good Ancestor program, introducing the elements of that, but also combining it with ritual and meditation and nature medicine. So looking at a variety of frameworks coming together, including systemic family constellations and weddings. I also use that as a framework for designing wedding ceremonies for people, and
Wow.
then running them. So we do a whole ceremony with ancestors and the blessings from the ancestors for the couple who are getting married. It's fascinating.
That sounds extraordinary. Hmm. I just reflecting on what you said and thinking about. I did 3 days of supporting the foundation training with Centre for Systemic Constellations last week, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, talking about the orders of love in that part of the first module. And one of the exercises we did is a sort of, help inviting everybody to self-organize around age,
Mm-hmm.
and and what that brings up in terms of finding your right place, in the system that we were in the room. And it was interesting noticing that I was the 5th youngest in the group of 22, but the 3rd most experienced in this work. And so it's, like, how do we in our bodies know ourselves in different places in the same moment in time?
Mm.
I think one of the things that constellations work has definitely, the more I've done it, the more easily it is to identify sort of like, oh, this is where I am in this context, and this is where I am in this context. And certainly with one of the things that you named, just this morning, my friend Ninka and I were doing a kind of grief space and working with Francis Weller's 5 gateways of grief, and one of those is ancestral grief, and just that kind of way of being able to like have a map for something, so that you can sort of go, oh, okay, this bit goes here, or this bit I'm feeling belongs here, and this bit I'm feeling belongs here. And so, just naming that as one of the really beautiful gifts of constellations work and ritual work as well, I think, is that sort of designing rituals that help with that.
Exactly. I think one of the strong and sometimes underestimated elements of a constellation is when you just name things the way they are. When you already work in the field, when you set it up, and before jumping into any sort of resolution or trying to change something, to move something, just to name what is sometimes the only intervention that you need to do. And when everything is named the way it is, there is a breath out. It's relaxing for the system when the confusion is being resolved in some ways. When it feels that this person, sometimes a representative would say something like, but I don't feel like a daughter. But when it is named as, you are my daughter, and this person says, I am your daughter, there is a relaxation, because that extra entanglement where maybe she was also something else, that goes. And that has a quite a power in the work, just knowing what is, just naming the simplicity of, this is my place.
And the word that's coming up again, and I was thinking about this morning and thinking about our conversation when we were in London. You know, for me, constellations work is, even though you can do it one-to-one, it very much feels like a communal practice for me. And I'd love to know, like, how, I guess, how do you experience constellation work sort of when you're working in group settings, and then I believe the systemic ritual work and the Dan Van Kampenhout work is working with larger groups as well, isn't it? And so I'd love to know, like, what's your experience of this work in its widest sense, and the impact that it has on a sort of communal level when you're working together.
Yeah, I agree. The original way this work was done was in the group setting. And if we go back to the parts of the roots of this work, which is tribal in nature, the tribal healing would be happening in a group setting as well, in a community, when everyone comes together to support and witness the healing. Witnessing is very important, and this is what, in the group setting, in the constellations, the circle is doing. So when people remain sitting in the circle rather than become representatives, instead of sort of checking out and doing their own stuff, their task is to witness, to actively witness what's happening, the healing that's happening in the field. With ritual, it can be both. The ritual is designed in such a way that it can serve an individual. You can do a ritual for yourself, or as one person for somebody else. You can do it in a couple, but Dan does work in big groups. His groups are never smaller than 40 people. I think some of the largest ones that I remember were around 150, 200. And of course, the energy is very different. The energy is very different, and the specifics of holding a big circle is also different, because it's based on the individual requests from people. But because it's such a big circle, and because often it's done in a community setting, the interview phase that happens in systemic constellation would not happen in the ritual. So the requests are sent in advance, so that the facilitator, the ritual person, extracts, with the help of their spirit guides, the center request, the center message of the request that the person sends. What is the key that asks to be looked at in the ritual way, to be held in the ritual way? And the ritual is built around that in advance. So in the actual circle, the personal details are not revealed. It's only the actual intention for the ritual that is revealed, maybe with a little bit of background, just in terms of family background, maybe just bits of that. Because often also in such big community circles, it's more difficult to bring up personal, private details compared to a constellation circle, compared to smaller circles. And in terms of the impact on the community level, well, it's interesting how many people come to a circle and say really don't like being in a group. Generally, they have a difficulty being in a group of people. And by the end of the day, they love everyone in the circle. And there is lots of, interaction, lots of hugging, lots of contact. During COVID, when we started doing in-person circles, while it was still kind of restrictions in terms of distancing and stuff like that, it was quite difficult to maintain that. And in the beginning of the circle, we would agree to, let's keep it as safe as possible and the distance. But by the end of the circle, everyone was so feeling so close and so in communion with each other that it was quite difficult to maintain the distance, the physical distance. So I think on some level, the healing power of being in a group of people who are working at the level of truth, which often what constellations are doing. They're not interested in the surface material. They go down to the very truth level, and that's often love. So when you spend a day or 2 days, or sometimes even more, in that environment where love drives every action during the day, I think there is a huge transformational impact for people in that, which you can't really get in a one-to-one. In a one-to-one, it's also powerful and effective, so the work happens, but that sense of depth between different people that you can then go and experience in your other communities, and you can share it. I think it happens slightly different in a one-to-one. That transformational experience of connecting to people on a very true level. The people who are not a facilitator, because in the one-to-one you're connecting to somebody on a true level who is a facilitator, so maybe the experience is slightly different because it's still kind of a figure that is delivering a service or holding you or facilitating, has a specific role. With the members in the group, everyone else is more or less in the same boat, but the quality of connecting to each other is very different, and that's quite rare in our day-to-day life. So experiencing something like that, I think, is healing for the wider systems, not only for our lineages, but for our everyday systems, like work and family and others. I don't know. What do you think about it?
I think it's just listening to you and thinking about my own commitment to doing communal work rather than one-to-one work, primarily because, like I feel that sense of it's just different for me personally. Like it's different being in or facilitating group conversations where there are people who, you arrive and maybe nobody knows each other. Maybe some people know each other, but not everybody knows each other. But by the end, everybody feels that kind of quality of connection and relationship. And that what we have in our current system of, whether it's work or community or life in general, is that we don't necessarily have very good experiences of being in a group. And so when we do this work, it feels like it's beyond like doing the thing that we're all there attending to in a day. It feels like the after effects of doing group work is that people go away going, group work can be like that. I want to do more of that. And so, yeah, just listening to you speak, makes me want to come and experience what being in a group with you is like, and doing this work with you as well. And so, that is something that I will do this year.
Well, you made me think that one of the differences of being in a group like that is that you are essentially coming to be of service to somebody else if you're coming as a representative, but also if you're bringing an issue the rest of the day or the rest of the weekend, you will be participating in other people's constellations or rituals. So in some ways, you're coming with no agenda. You're coming maybe with your own story, maybe with your own intention for the day, for your own healing, but you are coming to be of service to somebody else. And you're doing it generously, and you're contributing, and collectively we are all stepping into something sacred. And that's because that's how I see the field, the knowing field, the information field, the whatever you call it, the field of ideas, or the 0 point field, that they call it. I consider it an intelligent being and a sacred space. So during the day, we all come in a very kind of everyday attitude, but we participate in something that is essentially sacred and mystical. So sharing that experience together as a group at that level, I think also bonds people in a very different way. And I think that's maybe in part why people keep coming back. So, and become constellation junkies, because it's an experience that there are very few places where you can recreate that experience of being kind of doing transformational work, doing sacred work, and hanging out with really cool people.
It's reminding me of another thing of, I think there's definitely more general acceptance, or a lack of, or not a lack of, but less fear in terms of like framing work these days as being sacred work or ritual work. I think it's one of the things that I'm noticing more and more, is that there's a sort of almost a longing for that kind of quality of attention and intention that people can, even people who wouldn't necessarily see themselves as spiritual or wanting to kind of hang out in spaces where there was some sort of obviousness around that sacredness, but actually when people come into it, really what we're talking about is creating a space that really pays attention to things and cares for things. And I think part of the work that I care about and love to do is being outside or listening to the birds, or watching flowers, smelling flowers as they're we're in the season now where the flowers are beginning to come, and so I think that comes also from a childhood of being taken out into wild places, and so I was going to ask you sort of, where do you feel like you're telling these stories now? Like, is there a sense of, where was your first invitation to this work? Like, how did you arrive here?
Well, I had a conversation. Well, no, before that, I read a book called, I think it's called The Family Tree, by I don't remember the name of the author. And it completely fascinated me. It literally blew my mind. It's not a constellation book, but it had very similar principles and stories in it that really sounded to me at that time, that was back in 2011, like miracles. And the author of the book was kind of doing constellation work, but in his own way. It was not called, or it had anything to do with constellations. but that generational aspect, ancestral aspect, and exclusion and different principles, they were all there, which I found out later on. At that time, I just read the book and I was like, oh my God. And then it happened in such a way that I met a daughter of this guy who wrote the book. And I was fascinated, and I had a conversation with her. We sat down at a table, and she drew my family tree. And I was telling her just bits and pieces that I knew about my grandparents. And there is a story about my maternal grandparents where, when my grandfather was young, they suffered some collective trauma. And the story holds it in the family that 5 out of 9 children died within the time of 10 days. So when I said this to her, she looked at me and she said, just imagine that, just think about it. How did the mother of those children feel? What was happening in the family at that time? And we know that they had to move quite soon after that. Did they have time to grieve? Did they have time to have a proper funeral? Did what did the family support? Like what was, because it felt like a place of huge pain. And that made me think, and I sat with that question for a long time, not knowing what to do about it, because it was good to know that something was, that was there, but what do I do now? So then I started looking for frameworks for ancestral healing, and I've came across a variety of different ones, and I've tried some quite intense and mad looking ones. And then I came across, by chance, somebody said, check out this. And I Googled family constellations workshops in London, and I went to one that was run by Chris Williams, who is the director of the Center for Systemic Constellations. And I've sat through the workshop, and I came as an issue holder, and I was so touched. It made so much sense to me. And I wanted to do so much more that I started Googling, about this work. And it turned out I was thinking, that it was more or less the same price to do 10 workshops or to get trained in it. And I thought, well, I will also know the principles that stand behind it. So I decided to train in it purely for my own development, for my own healing, and for my own journey, just to understand what was this kind of, that looked very much like miracle making. And when I sat in the training, it made so much sense to me, and it held so much meaning, and I could feel how suddenly, because I've been searching for meaningful experiences since I was very young, that life had to make sense and to be meaningful, otherwise what's the point? And sitting there, literally, when you realize that every breath, every movement of your eyes, color, skin, everything has meaning. You look at somebody, and how, as a facilitator, you sort of tune in into the whole picture. So I was hooked, and I did another training, and at some point, when I finished constellation training, I went into ritual training. And at some point, people just started asking to have it done, and I started doing it. And that's how, at some point, I just moved into it full time. So in some ways, it's my personal journey, and the people I met on this journey, and the kind of pointing out of the pain points that made a lot of sense. And what's interesting, that happened to me and happens to clients all the time. When we start looking in that way, when we start kind of being interested and curious about ancestral field, I knew very little about my family system. And then information just started coming, you know, and I've discovered so many interesting things about people in my lineage, maybe 5, 6 generation. And in this country, it's even more interesting because people have records all the way back to, 12, 13 generations. It's fascinating. And then the DNA testing, getting your DNA test and finding out what other ancestor is in you so that you have at least an idea of the lands that are involved into your making. So I found out that I have DNA from the land where I was born, even though I have no known blood connection to that land. We were just traveling, and that's why I happened to be born there. But later on, much later on, I found out that I hold the DNA from that land. So I was like, oh, that's exciting. So actually, I wasn't born in a random place. I was born in a place that my ancestor 400 years ago knew. I just didn't know that I had these ancestors. Yeah. So it's a journey. It's a personal journey that turned into a professional journey and into a passion, and it's still my personal journey. The work keeps happening, and doing the work also keeps the work to happen for myself.
Just listening to you reminds me of this sort of all of the experiences that I've had as well, where you, and I'm sure you've had these as well, where it's like, am I doing this, or is this doing me? Like you just meet people unexpectedly, and they have exactly the thing that you were searching for, that you didn't necessarily even know that you were looking for, and that there's a way in which there's more at work, maybe, is a simpler way of.
Absolutely. But that's to me, that's a fact of life. That's a given. It's I am part of a much bigger system that is like in the watch. They have all this little in the mechanism of the clock. They have all this little, how do you call this, pieces that all work at the same time, and they have to be, because they are all interlinked, they have to all work at the same time for the bigger clock to work together. So so for me, I am part of that system. I continuously co-create with everything else around me, and that kind of that sensation of being guided, of being when it's done to you and you're being led into people, situation, conversation, it's all part of that co-creation. It's me being at my best in every moment in time leads to everything else working at its best in every moment in time, and things just falling together, which is kind of what I call leaving the flow. Not even in the flow, it's leaving the flow. You are being that flow because you're fully present. And kind of all the parts of you, the ancestral, the karmic, the past lives, parallel lives, your childhood, inner child, all of that is together in one moment in time, and you're fully there as a whole being that you are.
It's so interesting because it's like it almost it does. It's the last question that we've got is what is your longing or hope for the world right now, in the form of a question. But it's in the way that we're describing it now, it's also what is speaking to you in your life. Like what are you noticing about where you are moving towards or within?
Yeah, the question, the longing and the question that I was thinking about is the question of that I'm trying to work with through my work with becoming a good ancestor. How do we become good ancestors? How do we, as we were just talking about it, how do we bring ourselves fully into the moment, to be fully resourced, to be fully connected to everything that is, with our ancestors, with everything that is, with the spirit world, with the physical world, with our bodies,
mm,
so that for later generations, we are those to whom they look at and, look for power, look for support, look for guidance, rather than for trauma work.
mm,
Am I passing on traumas, or am I being in my full power so that later on they can take from that, so that I
mm,
support not only now but also into the future? Because
mm,
they talk about 7 generations. We are working with entanglement 7 generations back, and we are going to be an entanglement 7 generations forward. So am I creating this entanglement? Am I carrying, or rather not wanting to see that I'm carrying something unresolved that will run, for the next 7 generations, and somebody will have to go into therapy or do constellations or do, whatever, so that they can heal from whatever I'm giving to them? Or am I
mm,
the one who is going to own everything that I'm holding, not only for myself and for my well-being, but also for them,
mm,
that they feel more empowered, that they feel freer to be themselves? And that's not necessarily talking about your children. Maybe we don't have children, but it's still the energy that we are sending forward into the work, because everything that we do on a daily basis creates that ripple that goes back and that goes forward,
mm,
and also sideways and always and below and above. you know Again, going into this mechanism of a clock, that everything is linked,
mm,
and me in every sense, even breathing, is creating that.
mm.
What did they call it with the butterfly effect? When the butterfly flaps its wings, the volcano goes in on a different part of the world. That's the effect, because
Mm,
I am linked with everything that is. What I do, what I think, what I breathe, what I believe, what I say
mm,
impacts everything else in
mm,
a subtle way, an energetic way, the way that maybe not necessarily is seen immediately, but
mm.
it does create this ripple. And this ripple, if we are in a healing mode, heals all the way back and all the way forward.
It's
And what was the other part of your question? You said something else.
what
uh,
it was just and what are you noticing now about like what you're in? But before you go, I just
yes.
want to kind of
Uh-huh.
it's something I've been thinking about just in the last few weeks. The way in which you might or we might describe this work to people who have never like have never considered it before, kind of might think that it's a bit woo, as somebody called it the other day. But the way you're describing it reminds of this kind of energetic quality of being a good ancestor and what we pass on to people. It really reminds me of something that is happening around football at the moment, which is that in Liverpool there is a manager that's leaving soon, and this guy is somebody who really embodies like generosity and good spirit and like care and supporting young people, and he sort of has this position where his energetic field resonates out to a whole city of people and to a whole global kind of resource of people who are connected around the world who support this football club. And in many ways, it's like that's a really simple way of explaining it to people who think that, they don't know how to connect to it. But actually, like, these are experiences that we're having every day in normal day life. That all we're doing by talking about it now is explaining it in a more richer context. I think that's the gift that we give on to the next generation, is like the best bit of who we are. Hmm.
And one of the things that I am doing with the Becoming a Good Ancestor program is bringing together systemic work, ritual work, and inner child work,
Hmm.
because that innocence of the child that gets so overshadowed as we grow up and we become so adults, but the child is the one who is always there, and the child is the one who keeps holding on the entanglements, who keeps reacting to things. This is where the feelings are. So when we play, we're getting in touch with that part of ourselves. And when we play with the inner child and with ancestors, there is this coming together that creates healing, even if in our real kind of life story that was not available or possible. So especially if we come from places of unhappy childhood where the adults were not necessarily good models or available adults, we then begin to, through the process of bringing together ourselves as an adult, ourselves as a child, and the ancestors, we begin this process of healing the image of an adult. And what does it mean to be an adult? And how can you be a good adult for yourself? So that we do come to our own power, and we understand what is a place of a parent, what is a place, because we have this experience with our inner children. If we don't have real children, and then having real children, that you can practice that even more because you've done that with yourself, or the other way around. So I think that element of play and imagination is one of the key ingredients in this work. And with shamanic work, with ritual work, imagination plays a big part. And often people say, well, I don't know whether it's for real or am I imagining everything. But it's been said throughout ages, since very ancient times, that imagination is a gateway for the spirit to get in touch. This is how imagination is what creates our experience of other realities. In some ways, dreams are our imagination. This is how every other reality that is out there comes and interacts with us in our physical, solid reality. So play and imagination are big things for me. Not necessarily only in this moment, but generally as the things that heal and bring things together and make things possible. Because for the inner child, and we are all children in some ways, it's much easier to digest stuff when it's in a playful form, when you are in touch with your imagination, when it's So I think these are the two things, and nature. A big part of what I'm trying to do is connect into the wisdom of nature, because in some ways we just talk about nature as nature, but in some ways they are, as in the beings of nature, they are our ancestors in the same way as our blood ancestors in our lineage. Everything. An ancestor is everything, is those who gave life, those who made life possible. So going far back, the life of a human being is being made possible by the beings of nature. So in some ways, they are communities that are our ancestral communities as well. So interacting with them in the way that, in the same way that we would interact with our ancestors, with our grandparents, creates a very different quality of relationship and connection, and opens avenues for healing that we don't factor in when we're just in our human world, when we're 100% surrounded by human-made stuff. We forget that we are part of this big mechanism, rather than the only thing that makes things tick.
Thanks. You've left me with sort of the two sentences, which is like, we exist because everything exists. Like we cannot exist without the trees. We cannot exist without the soil that cannot exist. And so to just be in the sort of the livingness of that. And the other thing was,
and they can exist without us.
yeah. And the other piece was just around, you have to give yourself what it is that you want to pass on to others. That kind of work around, imagining and connecting to the place inside of you that was once a child and that still lives within you within that sense, and that you have to be able to give that to yourself first before you can pass it on to other people. Thank you so much. This has been such a beautifully I don't want to use the word rich, but it's just so much that I'm probably going to travel with this week because of this conversation. Thank you so much.
Me too. It's a very inspiring conversation and questions that I sat with, and they will stay with me for a while as well. Just dropping deeper into that sense of what is important and why I do things. Because you get you fall into the routine of doing everything, and then to kind of take a step back and to look at the bigger picture, to remember why and where I came from and why and what was the primary motivation and why things are happening the way they're happening is a really good reminder. So thank you for this reminder.
Thank you so much.